Hey guys, I'm here to get into the film Taxi Driver, directed by Martin Scorsese and released in the year 1976. And this is the first, I think, Martin Scorsese official big time masterpiece where he really transcended himself and just fully broke into an original territory. And this is a film that's commonly referenced and commonly talked about, but I feel like it's seldomly talked about what this film really is, which is one of the deepest explorations of insanity ever made. And I think that it's a bit of an over the top, it's not over the top really, but it feels like it makes something very relatable. The fact that he's just very socially awkward, kind of socially rejected, very lonely in a big city. Essentially, he's kind of losing his head slowly but surely. But by drowning himself very deep into just something of a hell of his own creation entirely, and I think it's just a cautionary tale that it's very common for certain people who have some kind of have like a certain kind of oddity about them to go into it. This is the kind of the film that just makes loneliness feel frighteningly real to a point where it makes you kind of strong in the face of all this, and it makes you find fascination by evil and horrifying things rather than just fear, essential fear. It's by Robert De Niro. I mean, Robert De Niro gives about one of the most personal, raw, emotional expressions ever made. Because there's just an extreme amount of subtle tension in this film, and it never has acting just felt so real. I feel like the same with Jodie Foster and Harvey Keitel. It's just extremely disturbing. It's one of the most disturbing films ever made, but also one of the most fascinating films ever made. One of the most intriguing. It's my favorite Martin Scorsese film still to this day because this is just so powerful and very emotionally heart-wrenching. I think that's what I had to grow into a lot of ways. I think I can almost relate to the isolation. Obviously, I don't relate to the violent tendencies, but I also relate to crazy person. If you're out in a crazy, chaotic atmosphere all the time, you will become chaotic too. And that's I think this film kind of taught me that. This is a huge reason I am better off staying away from urban type of locations in the first place. I'm way more of a countryside kind of person. This film I think has always preached to me why in my 20s because I think it's saying that some people could just be too naive in the face of things and let your purpose build up to ridiculous things. Basically, it's very disturbing. It's one of the greatest films ever made, and this is just what a man's mental breakdown looks like. It's just one of the most memorable films of all time. Just how real this is. The character of Travis Bickle is just very not in the sense of going out and buying guns and become to shoot down criminals, because that's kind of what happens here. Literally, he builds a motive to shoot a criminal, save a prostitute. But it's literally, but this whole thing is just trying to tell you that this is crazy. This is mad crazy without preaching whatsoever. It's just showing it to you in a way that it's relatable. And then you kind of realize and wow, okay, all that that's because it's a beautiful display of masculinity, but it's going to all the strangest place possible, essentially, which is just kind of like a hopeless mission, essentially. But it gives him his life purpose, his life fulfillment. So it's just it just raises up a lot of. It's a perfect analysis of just where a crooked person in their 20s, man, typically can go, with their masculinity, you could say. Just the desire to go out and make something for yourself, the desperation to just build up in a person like that. It's really insane because it feels so everyman at first. He feels so relatable, socially awkward. But it's going on bad dates, and just but then it just builds up more and more into just this desire to feel that loneliness with a purpose, which becomes violent action and the feeling that he's doing a good deed. But is he? Not really. In a sense, it's just killing more killing. And because he's a veteran of the war, so he's uniquely troubled. I just always picture this man being a very troubled guy, in his youth and growing up. The film leaves that entirely to the imagination, but I certainly imagine that. So that's the thing. He's an insomniac. He's very lonely. He's very crazy. He's just kind of lost in this endless place of just conversations with himself that are pretty aimless, although it feels like it's meaningful and masculine in the moment of the time. And it's very personal too in a lot of ways. I guess I suppose it's a really depressing kind of thoughts kind of streaming through this film. It just goes beyond just how so many other films are doing it. This feels so influenced by French New Wave, honestly. I think more than anything, it's Martin Scorsese just made it the best American take on a French New Wave film. Just made it American New Wave 100%. This is just purely capturing the city of New York City as a hellhole of the late 70s. And I think I would relate to that outlook on the urban atmosphere typically, because I think this film and a lot of others just show me that I'm interested in the madness within that rush and studying it from afar, basically. This is a perfect film. I mean, it feels like Travis is always alone. He's always lost in a world where no one understands him, so it makes him go crazy, basically, literally. So it just shows it as it is, and it doesn't glamorize, or does it but it doesn't go back. I mean, the violence here is harsh when it happens. I mean, this feels like one of the most disturbingly violent natured films and how it does all this. And and again, it makes it all the more challenging because a lot of films will just show this stuff to you, but the Taxi Driver dares to make you relate 100% to it. And I think that's what makes this a controversial. It made this a controversial film. I think nowadays it's pretty universally agreed about. I mean, sometimes I mention this title. Sometimes it does still spark people of like saying it's not a great film. I'm like, it's the ultimate masterpiece of cautionary tale because this film kind of teaches me how not to. I suppose the Martin Scorsese was often dealing with like a person dealing with like the walk of Christ with the walk of like reality. And here's a man who maybe just had the right walk of Christ, but it just went all the misguided places, and it's just too relatable to this day. Like a lot of creative person can really relate to it. That I think in a lot of ways. It doesn't make them a bad person automatically, but these actions can just lead a person to just being that going that crazy about their just confusion and curiosity at the same time. Confusion about themselves, lack of purpose for themselves, but it just kind of builds up and stems into just some strange oddity, just a strange scenario. He kind of just builds upon himself. He feels like he has to do it. He puts his life into it because that's what happens. You want to put your life into something when you love something, especially. So it's like, well, he's just ready to put his life right into it. It's just bold, very original style living in this film, where it's just very there's no plot. It's just literally just following him around. It's just his state of loneliness. And then that loneliness just builds more and more into madness as it goes. And it's a cautionary tale that warns against that level of isolation. I mean, it's like the bad date. I mean, and it's an extreme case of just like borderline, like right there. Okay, like you could almost say, like it's almost like it's hard to explain it because there's a certain like likable factor about Robert De Niro's character, but ultimately the path he takes, it's really dark. Like, because I feel like at the same time, it's not like he's an incel kind of character. Really, it's not like he's perverted. He's literally just a crazy guy. Like he's literally tormented with what to do with his life's purpose. He's broken. He's lost and defeated. And he's just destroyed. This is the best cinematography ever. I mean, one of the best written films ever. The master himself, Paul Schrader, and then Bernard Herrmann doing this. I believe this is his final soundtrack. He did a lot of stuff in the 40s and 50s. But he brought something back here that just brings dread to the table. This is just a perfect film in every single way. This is what intense loneliness, harsh loneliness does. The extent of what it can do to a person, and that's why it's such a personable kind of cautionary tale. Because it's like, well, there's a line you don't want to cross, basically, and this is kind of what that line looks like to cross that line. You could say in a lot of ways. I absolutely, Sybil Shepherd, Betsy. I mean, all these scenes are just magnificent. And of course, Travis Bickle just being completely awkward about the whole thing. But then it's like she's almost interested in it at first. And then the further it progresses, it's just like, wow, he was really out of touch. So the madness here is intense. Like, there's just, I think a lot of the purpose of what this film does is it also kind of shows what it looks like in other people, like when people are going this crazy. It's like, well, it kind of helps you see cautionary tales of like the subtleties of what to look out for. It traits them a person that's going to go so crazy that I can kill, the fire of someone else. But maybe it seems like they have good intentions at first. I mean, just very much a further progression of what Mean Streets was doing, and just fully submitting. Again, just psychological trauma in a character, and it feels like. The world he's in here is just, it's not pleasant, but the question is like, why doesn't he ever leave? Because he's too interested in the madness. And I think there's something that right there is very relatable. That's almost like a dominatingly relatable perspective from not ultimately a great man, but ultimately his fascination and curiosity is so intense and strong that's almost enough, in its own way. But it's also like the purpose of where it goes is just, the message I think a lot of ways is just, well, hone that in, something beautiful. All that perspective and, the beautiful side of his Robert De Niro's masculinity into something beautiful rather than just harsh and ugly. So he has no one around to stop him for any of his bitter thoughts that he's built up upon his society and everything around him and his loneliness. Yeah, he doesn't want to ever leave. He's just the epitome of an alienated man who feels like he's made for something better. He just feels like he's got to do something better than himself. And basically, he just goes crazy with it. Like, he starts to see this Jodie Foster character running around, and then it just builds up and like, wow, I got to save her. So it's just sort of the ultimate anti-hero expression. It's one of the first true anti-hero expressions to come around. Again, a really dark mood piece. I mean, Martin Scorsese would evolve to a sense of humor because admittedly, like this and Raging Bull are frighteningly moody and dark. But they're necessarily so. I think most Martin Scorsese films afterwards typically had a slight bit of a humor about it from here. Because I noticed you can tell this is just an intense level to live on all the time. I mean, the making of this behind the scenes sounds like it was quite a ride, quite an adventure if you're a creative type. A unique amount of depression and a unique amount of just soul-searching exploration. Apparently, a lot of a lot of like art music from the late '60s was really going into influence more on this. I know a lot of Astro Weeks by Van Morrison was on constantly from Martin Scorsese. Um, and I'm sure it joins you a lot of like Bob Dylan, Bon on Blonde perspective too. Feeling like a king of the city, but also like you're an asshole and you're nobody too. Like, so the point is like delusion. I think this is what a close up of delusion really looks like in the end. And I believe it all really happened. There's always theories at the end. It's like, yeah, I was in a dream. And I'm like, yeah, I think it all really happened. And this is just kind of just how it goes. It's the ultimate cautionary tale, really. One of the best films ever made. And I feel like there's just nothing. I have zero contempt. This film has just really loved me. I've perhaps watched this film over 100 times, honestly, because this film is just so like just relatable and how it makes it all fascinating. And it kind of upgrades a lot of what like Stanley Kubrick was laying out with stuff like Clockwork Orange about just ultimate evil happening. But this kind of makes you sympathize more with it in a way where it's like, instead of just be like, okay, like over the top, he's bad. It's like, well, here's a man who's right in the middle, but he kind of falls into a bad place that's overwhelming in the end with it. So, I mean, all these scenes are just so, and this film is just so much more than like, I know it's always referenced to Are You Talking to Me, but I think that's crazy because it's like, this film is just so much more than like this, like, it's no action film. Like, this is just a really deep, I guess, exploration into the subconscious and a really original kind of dream like perspective on a nightmare gradually unfolding. That's what this whole thing is. It's like a nightmare is unfolding in a certain kind of way. He's no hero. Travis is no hero. I mean, that's sort of like a depression about, but his overwhelming curiosity. Like there was so much beauty about it, but it's just like, and I think the cautionary tale is that just to see that go to waste is to just, that's enough to weep about, And it's like, that's kind of what the message of this film is. It's a lonely man who becomes violent because he has nothing to hone in his beautiful masculinity. He has nothing beautiful directed towards. But yet he doesn't leave this place because it's like, well, he just, it doesn't have to explain why. It's just the way it is. So, yeah, I really love it. And I would call Travis Bickle an asshole at the end of the day. He is like, you're getting close up with an asshole, but you can tell the man has some intelligent thoughts. You can tell he's well kept in a certain way, but then the madness is just, a lot of aimless, a lot of isolation, a real intense desire to detach from humanity. It's kind of been overwhelming for this character. Yeah, this is a perfect film in every single way. I absolutely love it. Again, this is just what it is to be in the state of mind of a tortured headspace. And as a lot of like creatives are, I think this is just maybe one of the best expressions, or most raw expressions ever, of just the tormented head. And kind of laying out with minimalism what the film Apocalypse Now achieves with maximalism. I think Taxi Driver is the minimalist end of it. Just taking all this in, like nothing's. And the more I rewatch this film, it's like, the less I like Travis. So, I mean, he's less and less likable the older I get too, because I'm like, I realize he's 26, and it's like, okay, he's like a punk. This is like a punk film in a way, like its own kind of way. This is just extremely creative. It's just perhaps one of the best character studies of all time. It gets so close up. And I feel like it just really makes me think a lot of stuff like Paul Thomas Anderson films, like There Will Be Blood. I mean, particularly, like, because this is like in Scorsese. This is a unique one because this is just so uniquely dark the whole way through, and just very moody, very much an intense mood piece. And this is always a film that's stuck in a certain kind of way. It's a masterpiece, literally. And I feel like this is just something so strong about this. It's just, it's perfect. Robert De Niro is the perfect actor in this. It's frightening how good he is and how good his portrayal of loneliness is. And just the way he makes such horrible actions relatable. It's so intense. And this film is just genius. And all the solo separate scenes, again, are perfect. So one of my all-time favorite films. Sometimes, I mean, there have been phases in my life where this has been number one. But I ultimately always juxtapose like, okay, I kind of like have to evolve because I connect so well with things, but I'm like, okay, this is kind of like almost an expression of where a person in their 20s who can be creative but have like those insecurities can really flob it up in the end. And I think that's just kind of what the meaning of Taxi Driver is. Another one, and the last thing to mention is Martin Scorsese's cameo itself, which is just unbelievable. I mean, it's just that man could just do it all, really. And that's what this film is. It's like falling in love with the dead. I think I'm in love with the dead. So Taxi Driver expresses what it is to be in love with the dead in a certain kind of way. But also at the same time, these are actually terrible consequences unfolding. Just watching this isolated man, I find beautiful. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but it's tragic, tragically beautiful. So that's Taxi Driver. I mean, recommend it if you're looking for something intense. Simply. This is an intense film. There's just no doubt about it. One of the most intense films ever in tone and spirit. but very extremely entertaining in how it's done. Again, very experimental, I would say. Definitely an experimental piece that is very reminiscent of a French new, upgraded to like kind of Americana voice that further continues the French New Wave foundation. So that's Taxi Driver. I highly recommend this masterpiece if you're looking for an intense kind of film.